Right, so we'll have to start with the champions, David. My main question for you, given it's been a relatively quiet transfer window, if Liverpool go into the new season, as it seemed to be, but if they go into once the window closes with the current squad as it is, do you think they can retain the title?
I would say that they can. Yes, it's a weird one with like the timing and that where I think like it's easy to forget they had a little bit of a slump post COVID that like they still finished 18 points clear of everyone else. I think it depends. You're expecting like it was a natural drop off. You'd hope after they won the league, like partying too hard or whatever it was. But yeah, they hit the slump towards the end of the season. Maybe the motivation was gone and just the emotion of like finally winning it. But like I think they're still pretty well stacked when you look at it, barring any major injuries. They've got a settled team. They brought in cover at left back. I think Nico Williams like looks like he could. I don't think like Alexander Arnold's so unique that you can't really replace him at right back or have a backup. But then Nico Williams looked like he could be a solid deputy moving forward. It's just a case of, it's interesting with the Thiago links and everything. Like I think everyone wants him to sign, but it's a case of Liverpool having to sell to bring someone in. Like I was surprised they didn't bring in Timo Werner. I was hoping they'd get him rather than Chelsea. But Thiago looks like Ronaldo might go to Barcelona, so it's kind of 1-for-1 there. They're around the same age, and to be honest, Thiago's probably a better player. It gives you more. Ronaldo's been brilliant, but yeah. So in shorthand's question, I think they could retain the title, but I think mentally, it could be tough without kind of freshening things up. I think for the sake of new faces in the dressing room alone, it would be a good boost. They've had such a tough couple of seasons that maybe they will fall away naturally.
And someone who watches them regularly, like it's easy from the outside looking in to watch Liverpool games and just see them sweeping aside all before them. But are there any hidden issues in that starting 11? It seems crazy to say, but with 99 points and all that. But like, are there any concerns in that first choice 11 from your perspective?
I don't think so massively. I know, you hear the talk around the club or whatever club journalists that like they're expecting big things from like Minamino and Naby Keita this season. So I think still cover for Firmino is still rumours now are suggesting that Ryan Brewster might either be loaned out or sold this summer. And I think Origi, barring his couple of miraculous goal contributions in big games, like he's had enough time now to prove that he can be the second choice striker, and he hasn't really ever taken his chances. So again, like I said, if big injuries, like if Firmino's to get injured or Salah or Mane, you might worry a little bit. Like Minamino is relatively untested. Can he come in, say, for 2 months and start every game at a crucial point in the season? But apart from that, I don't think there's any major issues other than the core players being all a year older and another tough long season under their belts. I think it's like going to be interesting to see if Klopp can build a long-lasting, can he build a dynasty at Liverpool over 3 or 4 years? Such a demanding way of football. Can they just retain the title without a squad overhaul? Would be interesting to see, I suppose.
Yeah, I can totally understand if it was the normal run of things and they had the normal 2-month pre-season and there might be a bit of a hangover from a bit of a sluggish end to the season, but that's totally to be expected given the title wrapped up long before lockdown. But the chasm is so large, even between themselves and Man City last season, that even if Liverpool are a little bit off it for the first half of the season, they're still so far ahead in terms of what they bring to the table. I think you still have to make them firm favourites. What are your thoughts on Liverpool, Davy, going into the new season?
Yeah, I suppose like whenever Liverpool won the league, like the age profile of players is still quite good. Like, you wouldn't say Van Dijk or Mane or Salah are past their best or anything. Like they're still at their peak ages. I suppose the biggest thing is just how hard it was to win the league and mentally, and kind of gearing yourself up again to try and win it back-to-back years is very tough, and it's been proven tough for a lot of teams. I think that's probably the biggest thing that Liverpool have to deal with this year. But I think if Liverpool get Thiago, then I think it's very hard to see anybody else win the league, because he is one of the best midfielders in the world, and I think he'd give them a different dynamic. I suppose that they've gradually been moving towards more possession football anyway, and I think if they had Thiago, they could play possession and counter-attack pretty much perfectly.
it's funny as well that Thiago, like that extra dynamic that he bring them, like there's kind of an expectation, I think, now that like it's so well documented now how Liverpool are like their creativity is coming through the fullbacks and out wide. And if there's one weakness in the squad, you might say that it's in the centre midfield. There's a bit of a lack of creativity. Like I don't think Naby Keita or Oxlade-Chamberlain have probably been consistent enough to like they don't start in a lot of the big games anyway. So I can see if teams are forcing Liverpool to come inside, like bringing in someone like Thiago would be ideal, who can with his range of pass and how he can open up defenses. So that's one weakness potentially if teams are planning more to combat Robertson and Alexander-Arnold. Is that going to be a stumbling block for Liverpool without fresh faces in the squad?
Yeah. No, it's interesting because Thiago, Davy mentioned the age profile of the squad, and he's just a ready-made player. Like he's in his prime years, and there won't be any betting in period for him. If he comes in, he's going to improve Liverpool, probably tweak their approach, and I think that's more important. Like Manchester United in their best years weren't always super busy in the transfer market. It was always just sort of moving the project forward a little bit, tactical tweaks more than anything, and that's probably what Liverpool are looking at. I think Thiago, not only good quality in terms of personnel, but he would offer them something different in those big games, even in Europe. And I know like they'll be looking to retain the title, but Liverpool have such an affinity with the Champions League. I think they'll be a little bit disappointed with their performance in this year's campaign, and they probably want to get back to winning ways in that competition again. So he is just as we saw this season, he's just ready made for that competition. So I think reasons to be cheerful for Liverpool fans, definitely. The only thing from last season, they were quite fortunate with injuries, David. I don't know if you'd agree with that. They obviously didn't have Alisson for the first chunk of the season, and that's a huge loss. But aside from that, in other sectors of the field, they managed to maintain full strength, more or less. What area of the pitch would you say they could at least do without suffering injuries? Where are they least well stocked, would you say?
It's funny, like people obviously say the front three because there's a drop off in quality behind them. But one thing that I've kind of would be a little bit anxious about, like Dejan Lovren obviously has a lot of detractors, but like he was still in the top 4 choice for centre back, but he's been sold without any replacement coming in. So I'm wondering, like Joe Gomez and Joel Matip have, like, they're no strangers to injury. Like there's a lot of niggly injuries that those two have picked up. Gomez had some serious injuries, and Van Dijk has been miraculously, he's played, I think is he the only player since like Robbie Fowler in the 90s to be ever present in back-to-back seasons. So get even one of the three of them gets an injury or two. Like there's been cases where Gomez and Matip have both been injured at the same time. You're looking like the drop off behind that, unless Fabinho slots back, is kind of teenage academy players to step in there, which obviously isn't ideal. So either that, or I'd still wear, like, if Firmino gets injured, I know Minamino could possibly play a false 9 role. But again, you're looking, it's going to be a drop off, especially with the qualities he brings. Or either if Mane or Salah get injured, you're looking at, I don't know, is it going to be Brewster or Origi? Do you push Chamberlain forward? So I am a bit surprised they haven't brought in kind of established backup for the front three.
Yeah, it's a strange one to see Liverpool needing to almost sell to buy. Like that was an understandable position a couple of years ago when Bournemouth seemed to buy all of Liverpool's up and coming players for extortionate fees. That was Bournemouth are unfortunately not in the league anymore, so Liverpool can't get that money anymore. But the fact that they have to sell the likes of Brewster rather than loan him out again, or to try and gather funds, seems a bit of a strange position to be in. But the COVID-19 being that is, I can understand clubs being cautious, and Klopp had some interesting comments speaking to Kelly Cates on 5 Live there recently that Liverpool aren't owned by an oligarch or a country. Like they have to be a bit more prudent with their funds, and I think that's totally understandable. And that's probably why they didn't go for Timo Werner. Like Chelsea threw that money at him before the full ramifications of this pandemic were really laid bare, and time will tell if that was good value for money. But Chelsea have certainly been busy. We might get to them shortly. Any final words on Liverpool, lads, before we move on to Man City? Because David mentioned the young players coming through, and presumably that's what he's looking at, David, for squad depth. I know Lallana and Lovren have gone, but the likes of Curtis Jones, Nico Williams, etc., are they going to step up this season?
I think so. I think Curtis Jones, like towards the end of last season, was kind of gradually getting more involved. He was kind of one of the star performers, say, when there was that debacle with the League Cup where they were putting out the second team and the clash in the Club World Cup. He was kind of really came to the fore in some of those FA Cup games and smaller games. And then pre-season, they seem to be integrating him. I'm surprised at Brewster alleged stories that he might be sold, because it looked like he was having a great pre-season off the back of a great loan move at Swansea. So, yeah, it's interesting to see if there's great talent in the academy, it looks like, and from what I've seen. So Klopp kind of is one to keep things tight in the squad as well and allow pathways. So I'm just interested to think, do you think that they'll retain the title, you two lads? What's your expectation?
I think there's nothing to suggest that they can't be favourites again, given, as I said, how comfortably they won the title last season. And barring Chelsea, have recruited very well, but we'll get to them and whether they're going to be able to make all those pieces fit. But I wouldn't say Man City have gone beyond the bounds in terms of improving their squad. Like, if Koulibaly comes in, I think that would be a bit of a game changer for them. We'll get to City next. But I think Liverpool, yeah, I'd be predicting them to retain the title this season. I don't know what Davey thinks.
Yeah, I think they deserve favourites. Doesn't necessarily mean they'll do it. I think it will be interesting to see, and to said the mental impact of winning the league last year. But I think they deserve favourites. Yeah.
Any last word to you, David? Are you predicting back-to-back league titles?
Yeah, can't go against them. I think it'll be closer. I think that the chasing pack from, say, the top two that's been the last couple of seasons, Liverpool and City, will definitely bridge that gap a lot. They might even upset the top two, but I'm going to go for Liverpool to narrowly retain the title.
Sounds good. And we'll move on to Man City now. Man City, you mentioned things might bunch up a bit, Dave. I would agree with that. And I wouldn't even be quite sure that last year's top four will finish that top four in that order this year. I reckon it will be those four again, but I think I wouldn't be surprised if it's a little bit mixed up. Man City have their bookies' favourites second behind Liverpool. So, as I mentioned, I'm not quite sure about their recruitment. Ferran Torres, I'm not sure if either of you have seen much of him play. Nathan Ake is a proven player with presumably his best years ahead of him. He's only 25, but he has lots of Premier League experience. But it always seemed like he was going to be a secondary addition in the defence, not the guy that's going to solve all their post-Vincent Kompany issues. Like, as I said there, if Koulibaly comes in, I think that really kicks them up a gear, and him and Laporte would be a very strong pairing going forward into the new season. So, are Man City, are you expecting them to kick on and close the gap to Liverpool, or even contest the title again?
Yeah, I think if you look at Man City last season, they lost a lot of games, and they're a real feast or famine team. Whenever they won handsomely. They won by 4-5, but when they lost, they showed very little resilience, and they conceded very similar sort of goals. Conceding set pieces, soft defending, and then if you look at who they brought in Nathan Ake, but if you look at Bournemouth's defensive record, it's never been that brilliant in the league, and you don't see him as the player to transform that. I guess you don't see City being as bad as they were last season, because they've been so consistent over 4 years, and they have probably the best player in the league, Kevin De Bruyne. So that they're going to contend, but when the push comes to shove, I see a lot of the same problems popping up.
I'd agree with that. I think you'd really have to question Man City's defensive acquisitions over the last couple of years. Like, the money that's been pumped into that defence, I'm still looking at it ahead of the new season, and there's issues all over the place. I mean, the fullbacks positions, they get exploited there quite a lot. I don't know, you look at Kyle Walker, Mendy, Cancelo, or any of them top players defensively. Ake, I think, is a funny one. I actually like him as a player, but I don't think he's the player that City need at the moment. As you said, Ronan, he seems like a secondary kind of a squad player, or maybe if you're going to play the back three, he'd be a third centre back. But he's like a left-sided centre back. I think is where he's best, where Laporte is probably their best defender plays. So I thought they would go for Koulibaly type or a more commanding type to play alongside Laporte. She said Ronan, like a company kind of replacement. So I think it's going to be interesting to see. They're so good up the pitch, but then again, as Torres, they've lost Sané to Bayern Munich. A player I really like. I think Ferran Torres, maybe Guardiola obviously is the expert, but his stats wouldn't blow you away on paper. So I don't know. Are they going to be any stronger this year than they were last year?
Yeah, I've never been totally won over by Guardiola, I have to admit, which sounds like a crazy thing to say, but post Barcelona, just especially in the defensive side of things, like I think he tries to be too clever by half. You remember even at Bayern Munich taking Philip Lahm out of the right back position, playing him in a holding midfield role. It was just it was almost as if to say, I think everybody here and take probably the best right back in the world out of his natural position. And you mentioned it there, just throwing money on top of money at the defence. Well, let's do some coaching here. Like, let's try and improve Kyle Walker or Cancelo, who's playing very well for Portugal the last week or so. Like, let's improve these players, make them top level Premier League. And centre back wise, like, broke records for Laporte, and they were obviously without him a lot last season. But if he's fit this year and Ake and Koulibaly come in, and that's like the guts of $500 million spent on a back four where Mendy is barely featured either, and you're just thinking excuses have to dry up eventually here. You know what I mean? Like, you've thrown a lot of money at this defense. You've had 2 cracks at the goalkeeping position. Ederson making numerous uncharacteristic mistakes, even though, can you describe it as uncharacteristic if he does it on a bi-weekly basis? But no, I'm not sure about the Man City project. I wouldn't be surprised if this was towards the end of Guardiola's time there. He's already, I think, stayed longer than most people expected at the Etihad. One thing I always found interesting about this reign, though, he never ever seemed quite satisfied with his striking options. Like, he has Sergio Aguero, who never really fit the mold of the Guardiola striker. He's got Gabriel Jesus, who I always quite like as a number 9, but in the big games, he saw it against Real Madrid, he played him wide left and almost played De Bruyne and Sterling through the middle. So that's kind of pointer for me that he's just not satisfied with his number 9. But, you know, it's a first world problem for Guardiola. He's had plenty of investment behind him, and Man City somehow got away with their Champions League ban. So they have another crack at things this season. What are your thoughts on Man City, David? Do you think they are going to be Liverpool's nearest challengers, or what are you looking out for in the first few weeks of the season?
Yeah, I'm interested to see the first couple of weeks with City. What you said is interesting about the strikers, because like it seems like he's been trying to replace Aguero for maybe 3 or 4 years, or find the replacement like very prematurely. You look at Aguero and he's so reliable, whereas I think Jesus is more of maybe a Guardiola type player in terms of movement and work ethic, but I think he lacks that killer touch a little bit at times in some big games. Like, he can be quite wasteful in front of goals, so it's almost problems of Guardiola's own creation in a way. But I think that City it's going to be really interesting to see today, can they maintain their grip on the top 2, let alone challenge for the title. Again, they could surprise us and win. It's City, they could win the league with 10 points. They have the talent, you would say, in the squad, but I think they are possibly in danger from, you look at Chelsea, United coming behind. I think the gap is really going to close this season. We'll see it.
Yeah, and one other pointer, Phil Foden's obviously in the news this week, but he made his England debut last week, and I think the assumption is, and Guardiola talking some nonsense in the media, that he's the most talented teenager he's ever worked with, even though, you know, like, he has had some pretty impressive teenagers at other clubs, I think you'll find. But Phil Foden, I think they're expecting him to fill the gap that David Silva left behind. Davy, would you go along with that, or how do you think they're stocked in a squad depth perspective?
I think the thing about City, they've always had probably the best quality depth of all the top teams. Maybe Man United have always had, the sort of 22, 23 squad, but, players like Mata and Lingard coming in, whereas Man City have always had, like Bernardo Silva, Mahrez type player coming in. I think there's a few interesting things happened last year. One was Bernardo Silva seemed to fall off the map. I thought he was going to be the star for Man City for many years to come, and he had that incident with the racist joke, and got banned and never seemed to really recover from that. And they bought Rodri as the long-term Fernandinho replacement, but I haven't been massively convinced that he can do the same job as Fernandinho. And Fernandinho's still playing regularly, and he's must be about 35 now, and he was a Pellegrini or Mancini signing. So that's such a key position in a Guardiola team is defensive midfield. So it'll be interesting to see if Rodri can pick that up this season.
Yeah, I think when push comes to shove, they merit their place in the bookmakers' rankings. I think they probably are the second best team heading into the new season. But as Davey said, doesn't always play it like that, and I think it will be a bit more mixed up and bunched up this year. I think the gap will close. I think Liverpool and City have probably opened up a big enough of a gap that you'd have to favour them, but we could be having a different conversation by Christmas. It'll be interesting to see. One of the teams pushing the third place team from last season, Manchester United, who haven't been as busy in the transfer window as I think most people would have predicted, but have brought in Donny van de Beek, who I think will add a bit of squad depth that they were lacking last season. And speaking of Klopp earlier and the evolution of his team, David, I might start with you here. Like Man United had seemed to be a very dangerous counter-attacking team, but didn't have much beyond that. But the additions of Fernandes, the return of Pogba, Van de Beek coming into the squad would probably let them give them more strength to their bow almost, and let Man United be more of a threat in games that they were struggling against maybe lesser teams that sit in against them with a low block. United probably will be able to dominate those games a bit better. What do you think?
Yeah, I was very encouraged with what I saw from United after the lockdown. I think, at the start of last season, United really struggled with any sort of injury they had because of the lack of depth. And, whenever Pogba and Rashford, Martial were missing at times, you had those awful games like the Newcastle game. They lost 1-0, and once after the lockdown, when you had Pogba back with the new signing Bruno Fernandes, who's made a massive difference, United played some quite good football, and Martial has really kicked on in the striker role. So there's a lot of encouragement there, but as the lockdown went on and a lot of games came after each other, United kind of started to look tired, and after playing the Europa League, you would worry, will there be an impact on that in the start of this season? The other thing is, in pre-season, they've had a bit of a nightmare with their captain, Maguire, being caught in the court case in Greece. Pogba tested positive for the virus. Greenwood had the incident in England, Iceland, and Wan-Bissaka, I think, has to self-quarantine because he went to Dubai. So there's a few issues there that they have to deal with, and this I think if they want to compete with Man City and Liverpool, they need to get in Sancho or someone of that level, and you would like to see a bit more progress on that transfer if it's going to happen.
Yeah, like Van de Beek, I always thought was more of a, just looking at him, he's like an upgrade on Ander Herrera rather than this transformative player that's going to come in and revitalize the team in the way Fernandes has. I think he probably has potential to be better than that, but I think United fans shouldn't get their hopes up too much that he's going to come in and just change the team entirely. The likes of Sancho, David, I think that's an elite level recruit that would kick United up another level, isn't it?
Yeah, I think when you look at the impact that Bruno's made, he's like you were talking about earlier with Thiago, he's the ready-made player coming in. There's no betting in period. He's come in and instantly lifted the levels of everyone around him. I remember even back to their first time together when Pogba came on, and together instantly it just seemed to gel. So I think that, as you said, Van de Beek would be one where it might take a bit of time to gel and find that right balance in midfield. Is he going to play the three of them in a midfield three, or is he going to keep kind of McTominay in there? Is he going to move someone further forward? I think whereas Sancho's coming in, you're getting a ready-made star as one of your front three, where it might also take some pressure off Greenwood. I don't know what you two think about that and about his pathway, but would you rather see him as the kind of floating impact player, or kind of a player in rotation, and have really bringing a top caliber player like Sancho? I mean, Sancho could be like Sterling is for City to United if things go well and it clicks. I think look at like City and Liverpool, and the thing that really has them ahead of the chasing package, the likes of having like a Salah, Mane, Sterling, or whether it's Mahrez was Sané for City previously, who's going to chip in and just. I think the issue has been with say Martial and Rashford, as talented as they are, they can be quite inconsistent at times, so they've off days. Whereas I think really to be one of those elite teams, you need one of your front three players or wide players certainly to come up with those big moments almost every week. So I think someone like Sancho will really could help United kick on even further.
Yeah, like I don't know what Davey thinks, but under Mourinho, while they were winning trophies and climbing up the table, you never felt they were quite on an upward trajectory in terms of the broader scheme of things. But for the first time, it feels like not only like third was a very respectable finish given how badly the start of the season, and closed very strong, and the injuries they had to withstand and all that goes with that. But I think he's approaching the transfer window correctly this year. Like I think Jadon Sancho is the number one priority, but they're not going to be, to use that awful term, held to ransom. I think they will do what Liverpool did with Van Dijk, and if Sancho's not available this summer, they'll wait till January or they'll wait till next summer, rather than doing what they would have done a few years ago and splurging the money on a player that doesn't fit the criteria. So I think if Sancho comes in, it's an ideal world for United. They have other areas to address, which Davey might touch on in a second. But I think if Sancho comes in, and it is an interesting point about Greenwood, but I think he's the most natural goal scorer in the squad already. And I think the pathway for him will be as the number 9. And I think that will open up a whole new set of options for Manchester United. If Sancho comes in on the right-hand side, you can play Rashford on the left, you can play Greenwood to the middle, Martial as a number 10 almost, or you can play Greenwood as number 9, Martial on the left. So it gives United a fluency that they haven't had in years, like an unpredictability in that front line, which would be one of the best front fours around if they can get them all clicking. I know it's probably not feasible to play those 4 together against the likes of Liverpool or Man City, but in those games, as I mentioned earlier, against teams that were sitting tight, like there's goals aplenty across this United squad now. And again, you couldn't have said that for a long time. Hey, Davey, any other interesting elements you want to bring to the table on United going into the new season?
Well, they've been looking at left backs. It looks like, because I think Brandon Williams has potential for the future, but I don't think he's quite up to standard right now. So they've been looking at Reguilon from Spain, and I've heard some rumours about Alex Telles as well from Porto. But I think the fullbacks, Wan-Bissaka and Shaw, are very good defensively, but compared to the very top teams like Bayern Munich and Liverpool, United have kind of, especially when teams sit back, they're not really getting the attacking thrust from the fullbacks. So I think either those players could add a lot to the team, even on rotation, in terms of goals and assists from the fullback position. I guess I'd be slightly worried about the centre back options. So Maguire and Lindelof have been a decent partnership, but after that, they could do with another quality backup, I think. Bailly has been good at times, but very injury prone. And Rowe and Jones look like they're finished at the club. Tuanzebe look like he might kick on, but he's had some very bad injuries himself. So I think they could do with another backup there.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's funny, the stats will not back it up, but they've always looked shaky at the centre of that defence. But their improvement statistically in defence last season was marked, and they were one of the best defensive teams in Europe. And it's funny, the eye test wouldn't suggest that, because they always looked like they could be got at, especially just something about Maguire and Lindelof. They're a bit too similar or something. You probably need someone who's a bit more aggressive on the front foot, and someone like Koulibaly would be ideal in that mould. Again, though, if they are being linked with Upamecano for next summer, I think the suggestion is that United aren't going to just jump in and sign someone for the sake of signing someone. If he is going to be their long-term target, they're probably thinking we'll hold on till next summer and get him for a good price. So it will be interesting to see. The fullbacks is a good point that they're defensively solid, but maybe don't offer that much threat. But if they are going to start playing with Van de Beek, Fernandes, and Pogba, I think it probably is important to have that flat back four who are going to mind the house a little bit and let that front six almost attack. And that's probably, this season anyway, that's probably what he's going to be looking at, the likes of Reguilon, like if he's available for 25 million euro, I think it's a shot to nothing. Like if he turns out to be a flop, you probably get that money back from him because he's probably got his best years ahead of him. But for the first time in a long time, I think things bode well for Man United. A title challenge is probably a bit beyond them, but I think they'll at least match their position. Third has to be par again for United, and they'll be looking to improve on that again this year. Maybe break into that top two and win a trophy. David, from your perspective, are you concerned about Man United? Is this a resurgence, you think, or was last year a false done?
I think they're going in the right direction. I think last year is such a funny season where I don't think they were great for a long part of the season. The way they finished the season was really impressive. But I think, as I mentioned earlier, like people forget how big the gap was and has been to the top two. I think we're United 33 points from memory off Liverpool. It's a lot to make up in one season, but I think if I was a United fan, I would be quite encouraged by, as you said, the strategy. They don't seem to be jumping into rash deals. If they're willing to wait a year on a player, like it's no harm. We saw, as you mentioned, Liverpool doing that. To fans' frustration, waiting on Van Dijk, waiting for other players to come up. I've seen it suggested with Thiago as well that they're quite relaxed. They might wait till January and sign him on a free next summer. One thing that we haven't really touched on, which seems ludicrous given like Man United's strength in the goalkeeping department over the last decade or whatever, but I think it's an interesting one from my perspective. The De Gea Henderson, I think was the right move bringing him back and giving Henderson the long-term deal. But I think if you look at clubs who've had, it's just a question of Solskjaer. Does he keep the faith with De Gea, who's, in my opinion, been on a downward trajectory since probably the World Cup in 2018? It's a case of how long does he keep the faith with him? I think when teams start messing with, I mean, you saw it with Chelsea with the Kepa incident where he refused to come off the pitch. We saw him being dropped towards the end of last season. You're seeing it a bit with Arsenal now. There's a bit of confusion. Is Martinez going to leave? Is he going to stay? Because he's probably been better than Leno since he's come into the backup. So what's your opinion on the De Gea situation? Would you keep the faith with him, or would you like to see Henderson in the cups, or how do you think it should be handled?
I'll see what Davey thinks in a second, but I know we've spoken about this before, David, and I always think with De Gea, it's not necessarily a psychological thing always. I think because he's such a high twitch, reflexive goalkeeper, that just with age, those reflexes that were getting him out of jail so often with those, those crazy saves with his feet and like stuff that you wouldn't see, stuff that wouldn't be taught by goalkeeping coaches. Like you can't really be relying on those as you move into your 30s. And I think he probably doesn't have the fundamentals that other goalkeepers have. And Dean Henderson on the other side isn't the most flashy goalkeeper, but he's so solid. Like you could probably pick out mistakes on one hand that he's made. Like he made a very notable one against Liverpool, but that one aside, I think he should probably be England's number one, all things considered. And the fact that he's going to be on the bench for Man United this season probably going to scupper any prospect of that. But he's breathing down De Gea's neck. I think it's safe to say a 6-year contract speaks to the faith that Manchester United have in him. And for the first time, De Gea knows that if he makes mistakes like he did in that FA Cup semi-final, which did seem more psychological, the Mason Mount goal where he just it seemed like any sort of shot would have gone in that day. I think for the first time he knows that there is actually a ready-made replacement there. It isn't Sergio Romero, who's a great backup but not ready for elite level first choice goalkeeping. Dean Henderson's ready to step into the void, and I'd be interested to hear what Davey has to say about that.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what De Gea needed, was just a kick up the backside, because it was a very number one, number two relationship with De Gea and Romero there, whereas Henderson is out to take his position. I think if he starts the season with De Gea, I think I'd be willing to have it. But I think De Gea made so many important mistakes last season. If United want to compete at the top of the table, they just can't have that again. So I think De Gea really has to watch. He's only a mistake away from being replaced by Henderson, and it's a good dilemma to have for United, because it is two quality keepers, or at least De Gea was quality. But I think I would have hoped that De Gea might come back because he is still quite young, and if you look at a lot of goalkeepers over their careers, they have ups and downs. Like even you see, Manuel Neuer has had a brilliant season. Only 2 or 3 years ago, it looked like he was, outside the top 5 keepers in the world in terms of form, but he's come back. So um, I am hopeful that De Gea might come back into form, and I hope that Henderson rivalry will do that.
Do you think
It's it.
this is something I know Ronan and I have discussed before, where it could almost be a case with De Gea, like a Fernando Torres or Wayne Rooney, that they've been at the top for so long, so young, that I know people are expected that traditionally, like it's people expect that your prime is going to be your late 20s. Do you think it's a case possibly with him? He's only 29, that his best years maybe are behind him, that he has peaked and had those 10 years, say, at the top. He's had an incredible career. Do you think that this is a slump still, psychological, whether what it is, what the issues are, or do you think that it's a physical issue, as Ronan has kind of suggested, that his reactions aren't what they used to be for his unique style? Do you think he will bounce back to the top and be what he was, either of you, or do you think that he is probably on the downward spiral now, despite his relatively young age for a goalkeeper?
De Gea, at his peak was, one of the best shot stoppers that there's ever been, but he's always been lacking in comparison to, say, Emmanuel Neuer in distribution and coverage of the box. So, as Ronan said, Henderson is much more accomplished at those things. So De Gea really has to get back to that level to justify his place in the squad, I feel.
Yeah, I'd echo that. Like, he never, and like, it's a funny one because I'd be the first to bang the drum about shot stopping still being the number one thing. Like, there's so much emphasis on distribution and being good with the ball at your feet, but De Gea had the shot stopping part down, and you should be able to work on the other stuff. And he never quite got to the level of distribution or coverage of the box, which is such an important thing in English football, particularly when you have so many crosses to deal with. And he's a non-event when it comes to coming in and catching crosses. He just doesn't bother with it. So it brings a sort of, when you're not delivering on your world-class shot stopping and you're not bringing those other elements to the table, you can see why his teammates are sort of looking at him and thinking, it's time to step back up here. And I think it's probably more likely that he'll polish up on those other elements than it is he'll ever get back to the level of shot stopping he was at a few years ago, because that was just insane. And he must be thinking, how unlucky am I that I was having the best years of my life when United were in the doldrums, and now they look to be on the way back up and I might lose my place. So it's an unfortunate sliding doors moment for De Gea. But all things considered, I think United are relatively strong. I think they will improve on last season in terms of their points tally, and hopefully they'll get past the semi-final hurdle in at least one competition this year. But are we thinking third place for United again, or what's the general feeling between you two?
I think they'll finish in the top 4, but I'm not sure where. I think there's so many. As I keep saying, I think the gaps will be a lot more narrow this year. And it's definitely interchangeable from last year who's going to finish where. But I think this might be just 1 year too soon to really go hell for leather at the title. I think they might drop away. I think it feels like it took Liverpool really a year after making all those signings. Like, I know they only lost the league by a point, but then you look at the difference within that 1 year of losing by a point and winning it by 18. I think United are maybe 1 or 2 years back in their development from my perspective, but I could be proven wrong by Christmas.
Yeah, someone put it to me that Solskjaer could turn out to be the Brendan Rodgers of Man United, where he does a good job, brings them up to the next level, gets them playing correct football style, and has things pointed in the right direction. But then it might take a top level manager to come in and kick them over the edge. But that remains to be seen. I think Solskjaer has earned a bit more time, and it'll be interesting to see how they get on this season. Davey, what's par for United this season? And do you think Jadon Sancho's arrival, if it happens, will alter things massively? Do you think it is dependent on him coming, what their prospects are going to be like this year?
Yeah, I think that's the key if they want to move towards title challengers. I think top 4 again is the is the goal. But I think Chelsea will probably finish ahead of them at the moment, just based off the transfers.
We better get on to Chelsea now and Frank Lampard's young guns, who just signed Thiago Silva and a bunch of the best players in Europe. So let's see how they get on this year. Definitely the most impressive transfer haul, David, I think we've seen this summer, and probably belies the circumstances. We talked about the pandemic earlier, but Chelsea don't seem to be paying much notice of it at the moment. Like, what's par for them? Do you think third place is enough? Do you think Abramovich should be satisfied with that, or do they need to be pushing for the title after all these signings?
Oh, Chelsea are just such a tough one to figure out. I mean, we've had this thing with them where it seems like every second or third season they'll bounce back and almost surprise everyone. Like, you look at the Conte season, it's so hard to know what to predict from them each year. But I think like things worked out quite well for Lampard last year with the not zero expectations, but he was given quite a pass in terms of, I know there's been jokes about how well Sarri did the previous year, but I think things went, he's integrated a couple of young players, he's kind of sorted, the midfielders are more fluid, I think, and the signings are like, someone put it to me that it's probably the best Abramovich, never mind anyone else, the best Abramovich transfer window ever, possibly, or in a decade at least. But yeah, the expectations and thing to manage, again, you're relying on all these new players. When you look at the caliber of players, you're talking about 5 or 6 players possibly slotting straight into the starting 11. So I think the way the Premier League has gone with the points tallies with the top two the last couple of years, you need to hit the ground running the first couple of weeks. Like, it can't take you a month or two to get settled. The title's gone by that stage. The way we've seen the last couple of years, maybe 3 or 4 years. So I think expectations, I think you're looking at, you need to be challenging for the title, I would think, and potentially winning a cup competition or going quite far. I don't know what you think you both think the expectation should be.
No, it's exciting, isn't it, the way you put it there, that how Man City and Liverpool have set the bar, and it's kind of like the Dublin footballers over here, where they're not going to drop off, so it's up to the other teams to get to that level. And it is exciting to think that United and Chelsea are going to have to improve to that extent, and the likes of Arsenal and Spurs behind them, that, you know, it's not as if I don't think City and Liverpool are going to regress to the mean, especially in the next couple of seasons. So it should make for a great Premier League. But yeah, I don't know what Davey thinks, but Abramovich is going to be looking at Lampard and thinking, I know you're my friend, but, you know, time is, you know, the clock is ticking on you now. You're going to have to deliver me a title, if not this season, in the next couple of seasons. And, you know, Chelsea aren't overly generous with giving their managers time. What do you think, Davey?
Yeah, I think he had the one season to bed in, and he had the excuse of you know, there was a transfer ban, whereas the excuse is gone now, and he's been given the blank check. I mean, the quality of the players Chelsea brought in is very high. I guess it's got to the point where you actually don't know who's going to play, and some of the players actually do quite similar things. Like, kind of thought when he was signed that Ziyech would be the number one playmaker, and then they bought Havertz, and then, you know, they still have Kovacic and Mason Mount, Jorginho, Kante, and then in attack, you know, Werner, and then, you know, they already had the young English players coming through as well, like Hudson-Odoi and Tammy Abraham. So, you know, attacking wise, it's an amazing array of talent. It's just whether they all gel and what sort of system they'll play to fit them all in. And then defensively, they have Chilwell and Thiago Silva will really improve them. All that's left is the goalkeeper, but I'm hearing they're actively looking for a goalkeeper, perhaps Edouard Mendy from France. So, I mean, they sort of covered all bases, and on paper it's a brilliant side, but it's just whether it all gels. But I think they have the potential to challenge for the title, because it's just been such a good transfer window for them.
It's funny. It's going to be funny to see how much this youth that he's been lauded for, how much these young players are actually going to play next year, because I was reading today there's talks of Tomori going on loan maybe to Everton. You look at Mount, as you mentioned, David, they're so stacked in midfield, and for those playmaker options, is Mount going to get a look in when you've got Havertz, you've got Pulisic as well come into the team. Like he's got to fit all these players in. Tammy Abraham is going to be himself and Olivier Giroud. I think are going to be doing a lot of head scratching with all these incoming. Like you imagine Werner's going to be the main man with his pedigree, and he's kind of coming in like that as maybe not the top level finished article, but I don't think he's too far off it. And he's a really good signing. Ziyech as well from Ajax, as you said. So it's going to be a funny. I don't know. We're going to see some outgoings at Chelsea in the next couple of weeks, but it's going to. He's got quite a job in his hands at getting this team to gel quite quickly, I think. Because I know if you drop 10, 12 points in the first couple of months of the season, as we mentioned just there, the title's probably gone. So expectations are going to be really interesting. Ronan, are you expecting them to challenge for the title this year, or do you think it's another couple of years down the line?
I think if the transfer window closed today, I think you'd have to definitely put them in the mix because they've just recruited so well. And it's actually probably the more low-key signings like Chilwell and Thiago Silva. I know Thiago Silva came in a free and is looking like a bit of a stopgap, but he brings a level of stability to that defence that was just absent the last couple of seasons. And Chilwell is actually, even though it was quite a big fee, I think it's good value for money given the English premium that comes with these players. And I think he's going to be England's left back for the next 5 to 10 years. So I think Chelsea have done good business there. The strange one is he seems ready to get rid of N'Golo Kante, and that seems to be a system thing where he just doesn't fit in the Frank Lampard system. But I think if you have N'Golo Kante in your squad, you sort of find a system that gets him in the team because no one does his job better than him in world football probably. And I think a lot of teams in the Premier League would be thinking, what kind of bid would we need to put in here to get him? Because he'd improve every squad in the league, I'd say.
In the world, I would say. This feels like it's a Juventus thing all over, where Juventus will just come in and sign N'Golo Kante for about 30 million and get one of the bargains in the summer. It's that nonsense thing that you mentioned earlier, Guardiola with Lamb. It's like Sarri comes in and it's Sarri ball, and let's turn the best holding midfielder in the world let's try and turn him into a more creative box-to-box midfielder. A system thing, whereas, as you said, I think Kante is still the best holding midfielder in the world. Look what he did. He won back-to-back titles those 2 seasons, Leicester and Chelsea, from that position. It seems ludicrous to change it, but I think someone's got to snap him up if he's available. Just a matter of who he goes to. One thing, though, I will say for Chelsea is the furloughing of staff. When things were going quite bad, there was no wage cuts to the players, no staff were made redundant. I know Abramovich may or may not agree with the whole thing about him and the way he's gone about his business with Chelsea, but without going too much into politics. But when you look at Arsenal, say, letting staff go and then bringing in Willian on huge wage, signing Gabriel, I think that's one thing I would give Chelsea in their favour, despite making all these big signings, that staff were made to pay basically with their jobs.
No, that's a good point, because it is a bad look, isn't it, when Arsenal released this public letter saying, we have to tighten the purse strings and then make a couple of signings and give Willian a big contract. So yeah, it didn't look great, but at least Chelsea, even though they are the big spenders of the summer, they have backed it up in other areas of the club, and it is worth noting. But it is just on the pitch again, and we mentioned the stacked options they have. I know Willian and Pedro have left, but do you think it's going to be more problematic tactically in terms of getting all these players on the pitch and giving them enough game time, or is it going to be managing the egos? Because we talk about Zidane and he gets lampooned a bit, Davy, for not being a great innovator, not being a great coach, but he managed to keep everybody happy in the squad, Gareth Bale notwithstanding. But when he was winning Champions Leagues, he was sort of keeping everybody happy. Do you think Lampard's number one priority this year is going to be making sure everyone gets enough game time, or could this lead to disharmony if the likes of Mason Mount and Tammy Abraham are being left playing with the under-23s while Kai Havertz and all the other lads are running riot?
It could, yeah. I suppose the only thing is you're looking at Chelsea team and you're not really seeing that many superstars like a Neymar or Ronaldo. I suppose it's probably more like Man City buys, the kind of the De Bruyne and Sterling, the sort of 22, 23-year-old that are gonna be a superstar, but they're not quite yet. So in that way, I think he might be okay with with dealing with that, and the likes of Giroud, I don't think are going to kick up a storm if they're not playing. You're mentioning Kante earlier. I think, with all his attacking talent, I think the obvious thing to do is to play Kante defensive midfield like Makalele used to play, and just sweep up for everyone. And I think he would really enjoy that role, because he's never really been that comfortable on the ball. But if he loses the ball, that's he's in his element. I think if you play Kante defensive midfield, could add a lot. Whereas I could see him continue to play Jorginho in defensive midfield, and Jorginho is great at ball distribution, but I think he's always struggled a little bit in the Premier League against counter-attack teams, and it's probably part of the reason why Chelsea's defensive record is poor. And I think if you play Jorginho with all these attacking players, some teams could exploit that.
So we just covered the top four from last season. We'll get to once Garrett's back in the fold, we'll get the view from North London and whether Arsenal, 2 trophies, lads. If you want to count the Community Shield, Mikel Arteta has hit the ground running. So we'll talk about all that next time. But that's the top four from last season. Are we in agreement that's going to be the top four this season in some shape or form, or what do you reckon?
I think the 2 North London clubs have done quietly efficient business so far. I think Arsenal still need a little bit more, but I think Spurs made quite Mourinho signings, like Højbjerg, no-nonsense midfielder. They needed a bit of steel in there. Doherty right back. We'll touch on that more, but pending what transfers come in the next couple of weeks, I think probably the top 4 we've named tonight from last season in some form will be the top 4 again. What do you guys think?
I agree. Yeah, I think Arsenal have a lot to make up. Although they look like they're on the right track, but they were mid-table last season. I think they drew so many games. I suppose they could turn them into wins, but I just don't see the same quality in Arsenal as the other 4 teams. And Spurs is hard to know, because Mourinho's second season has generally been his best season at every club. But I still see a few issues in their squad, and I think the other 4 are so strong. So I think they'll struggle to make up the gap.